sections is called Master Your Brain. Because if you could increase your brain power, then theoretically you could accomplish almost anything. Hi, my name is Brent Daly, and this course is an extension of that section on mastering your brain. Now, while having a healthy and strong body is highly important as well, most of us would probably agree that our activities are more reliant on our cognitive abilities rather than our physical ones. Now, many people have computer-based jobs, for instance, and this means that we need to use our brains to handle data, to manipulate software, or to come up with business strategies. Much of our success comes down to our ability to interact with others, which of course is very much dependent on our intelligence and our brain power. Now, whether you're giving a presentation and choosing the best words to communicate your message, or whether you're in an interview, or maybe you're trying to set up a date and you're trying to quickly find the wittiest or funniest responses to a question. Problems at home tend to involve finances, social situations, or legal issues. There are very few problems we can solve with our fists. In our spare time, we tend to pursue more intellectual activities too. Perhaps we play video games, reaching to enemies and reacting to what they do and solving puzzles, or maybe we sit and read. And even when an activity seems physical on the surface, it is in fact very often just as much cognitive. Take sports for an example. This requires you to be aware of the positions of your teammates and your opponents and to use your body efficiently and accurately through space. Or how about doing physical labor, such as making repairs, which almost always involves some measure of engineering. So, if you were smarter then, or if you just had greater command over your mental faculties, well, think about this. You'd be able to concentrate longer on tasks and get more work done, thereby progressing further in your chosen career and earning more money, thereby giving yourself more free time at the end of each day and giving you fewer things to stress about. Well, you'd be able to come up with unique ideas and novel solutions, thereby potentially making yourself rich or changing the world in a positive way, thereby solving problems that you face in your daily life. Well, you could improve your physical and sporting ability. If it's important to you, you can impress anyone in a conversation. You could become better at even any tasks, from plumbing to computer games. You would become more self-sufficient and self-reliant, and even beyond the practical and tangible benefits of boosting your brain power, you'd be able to benefit from simply having a greater appreciation for the world around you, a better understanding of how things work, an enhanced capacity for learning, and more incentive to do so. Perhaps you can improve your understanding and appreciation of the very nature of life and the universe. Think about that. You could become limitless. It's no mean feat imagining what would be possible with greater brain power. If you yourself were greater, and so perhaps the best place for us to look would be to fiction. What if we consider a fictional example of someone who is suddenly bestowed with incredible mental capacity? Well, and the best recent example of this probably comes from the film Limitless. Now you remember in that film, The protagonist, Eddie Mora, is given a smart drug, a supplement called NZT. The tablet is an experimental drug that has the ability to help anyone to use 100% of their brains. Now, of course, that's a load of nonsense. We already use 100% of our brains, but we'll allow the writers the poetic license. When Eddie takes the NZT, he is instantly transformed. He goes from being a slob and a struggling writer to cleaning up his apartment and his appearance and completing his manuscript, which of course goes on to become a bestseller. He then works out the stock market and begins day trading, becoming rich from his home. He talks several women into bed before winning back his ex with impressive displays of intelligence, such as his new ability to speak several languages. He moves into a stunning, luxurious apartment and attracts the attention of an investment firm. Eventually, he uses the power and influence he accrues there to run for political office. All this because he was able to take control of his brain. Because he was able to see patterns that others missed. Because he knew exactly what he had to do. And because he gained sharper intuition and better cognitive skills. Now, of course, this is fiction, and in reality, no such pill exists. Neither can we say with certainty that you would see such a huge impact on your life if you were to increase your brain power alone. But it's certainly a believable idea that your life might change that much. And what is very exciting is that there really are ways that you can boost your intelligence, albeit to a slightly lesser degree. But there are really ways you can bring about tangible, measurable improvements, and that's important. You got to be able to measure what we do. These improvements that will come about in your life by focusing on ways to increase your IQ and your focus. So, in this course, you're going to learn precisely how to do that. You're going to see how you can increase your intelligence and focus to a profound degree, how you can become sharper, how you can learn faster, and how you can even improve your social IQ. By the time you're finished, you'll know how to train your brain in just the same way that you would normally train your body. And the results will be incredible. Before we move on, I want to address just one more topic. That's the power of working fast. If you have greater concentration, and if you can think more quickly, then you can work faster. Now just imagine if this is something you've been training for from a young age, and it's something that you genuinely believed would help you to perform very well throughout college and into your career as an adult. Now, for instance, in college, the ability to work fast would allow you to effectively complete more work than all your peers, and that would lead to better grades. And that would lead to these grades without really trying. You would routinely leave your work until the last minute and then complete an essay of acceptable quality, thereby giving yourself much more free time. In exams, you could write twice as much as most people, and when coupled with a realization of what examiners were looking for, you know, almost all examiners will mark papers very much by referring to a checklist of things you need to complete. So if you knew that, see, that meant that you could get better grades than perhaps you could have otherwise. Then, when you left college, you became a copywriter and started taking jobs for other people. You quickly realized that there was a lot of work out there, but only if you were willing to work for, say, $2 or less per 100 words. So the solution? Work incredibly quick. See, by writing 20,000 words a day, you found you were earning a very good salary right away. You moved out of your parents' house and got an apartment with a balcony overlooking the ocean. With training, you learned to write faster and faster. You eventually bought yourself enough time to start doing other things in the second half of your day. Things like you perhaps created an app that went on to become a bestseller, and you eventually wrote a novel. With all this spare time, you created a YouTube channel that quickly gained thousands and thousands of followers, all because you were able to upload highly produced videos very quickly. Now, this little story gives you an idea of how being able to harness the power of your brain can lead to better results in real life. This is all stuff that you can be trained to be able to do. And with the help of this course, you will be able to do it. All right then, let's start out by looking at the neuroscience of intelligence and precisely how you can go about increasing it from a theoretical standpoint. So, welcome to your brain. Here you have a massive interconnected web of neurons which we collectively refer to as your connectome. Think of this like the world's largest mind map, except that it is made from billions of connections. Each of these neurons represents an experience, an action, a memory, or a qualia. So, for instance, you have your visual cortex, which contains all the neurons responsible for your sight. If you were to open up the back of your skull and stimulate those neurons individually using an electrode, by the way, this has actually been tested, then you would see points of light appear in your vision corresponding to the specific neuron. That's fascinating. Likewise, if you were to stimulate neurons in the motor cortex, then this would cause your arm or your leg to move. Or it might make you feel a sensation on your ear. Other neurons have different jobs. For instance, there are those that have the role of storing memories. These light up when we recall things that happened to us in the past. Now, others might make us feel happy or sad. Others might represent aspects of our personality or our ideas. These are grouped into clusters in the brain or into regions of the brain, which is why brain damage can end up knocking out very specific abilities or altering our personalities. And At any given time, multiple brain areas will be active, representing the way in which your brain is being used. So you might have activity in your visual cortex because you are processing the things around you. But you might also have activity in your hippocampus relating to memories. And these memories are associated with things you're seeing, and you might have activity in your prefrontal cortex as you make plans as to what you are about to do. Now let's talk about neurotransmitters. See, these neurons are connected via long tails and branches called axons and dendrites. They don't actually come into physical contact with one another, but rather they come very, very, very close to touching and leave just a very slight gap called the synapse. When one neuron fires, it causes all of the surrounding neurons to become very excited. And when neurons pass a certain excitement threshold, then they fire too. So in other words, you might see a duck, and this might register as a representation of a duck in your mind's eye. That causes a certain pattern of neurons to fire, and those action potentials, that's the technical term for these electrical charges, these will then travel down the axons to related concepts that are connected. These include the likes of memories you might have about ducks, opinions about ducks, or even duck facts. Might even conjure up Donald Duck. Who knows? But only when enough activity surrounds your duck cluster of neurons will those actually light up, and only then will you experience a memory or a thought of the Donald Duck character, for instance. Neurons can become excited, but they really only have two states, on or off. What's less binary, though, is the signal that they send and receive, and this is where neurotransmitters come in. Neurotransmitters are chemicals that exist in the brain that effectively add color and nuance to the communications happening across your brain. These act like hormones in that they are able to change our mood and change the way we feel about something. The difference is that they have a much shorter lifespan and that they act on the brain specifically. Now, among other things, neurotransmitters make neurons surrounding them more or less likely to fire and will thereby put the brain in an overall more excited or a more inhibited state. At the same time, though, they can also increase the likelihood of new connections forming, and they can increase the apparent importance of certain activity, thereby directing your attention. Now, an example is dopamine. Dopamine is an excitatory neurotransmitter, which means that it makes us more aroused and more awake, and it increases the chances of neurons firing. When dopamine is released in a part of the brain, which causes us to become more focused on whatever is happening right there, because it tells us that thing is important and worthy of our attention. At the same time, dopamine increases our likelihood of remembering that event because it makes connections in the brain more likely to form. And finally, dopamine makes us more likely to remember things that happened and more likely to stay motivated. Dopamine is often described as the reward transmitter, but it would be more accurate to say that it is released in anticipation of a reward. Other neurotransmitters include the likes of serotonin, that's the feel-good hormone, of cortisol, that's the stress hormone, and of oxytocin, the love hormone. All these change the way we subjectively experience the world, and they impact on the nature of the physical change that occurs within the brain. An area that has been extensively studied by psychologists and neuroscience in recent years is a subject called brain plasticity or neuroplasticity. This refers to the brain's innate ability to change shape in response to stimulation and activity. So previously, we believed that the brain was a set shape once we reached adulthood, and that it wouldn't change further. What we now know, however, is that the brain continues to grow and adapt as we get older, and that it is constantly forming new connections and even birthing new neurons. In studies, it has been shown that repeatedly engaging in a specific activity will cause the corresponding brain area to change shape. Now, for instance, if you learn to play the cello, then the areas in your motor cortex that are responsible for the sensation and dexterity in your fingertips will get larger and more complex. Likewise, if you play computer games repeatedly, then the brain areas that are responsible for your ability to make out small details on the horizon will improve. Now, taxi drivers have physically heavier brains than any other professionals. Why? Because they change shape in order to accommodate all the new routes and destinations that they commit to memory. There is a simple rhyme you can remember to understand the way that plasticity works, and it's simply this: neurons that fire together wire together. In other words, if you continuously repeat the same action over and over again, then eventually the corresponding neurons will wire so that you have committed that sequence of movements to memory. Well, this is a good example. If you eat a lemon every time you see a certain picture, then you will eventually associate that picture and the lemon, so that seeing the picture causes you to get a sour, bitter taste in your mouth. The corresponding neurons fired at the same time so often that they now have connection. And now activity in one neuron will increase the chances of the other firing. What's more is that repeating this connection will reinforce it over again. This occurs via a process called myelination, which basically means that the axons are being insulated to protect them against damage and to help the signal to travel more quickly and more efficiently from one neuron to the next. This is how we learn new subjects, and it's why someone who has serious memory loss can sometimes still perform tasks like playing complex piano concertos. They simply repeated the movement so many times that they became highly myelinated and protected. Now, what to do with all this information? See, that's a lot of information to take on board, and you might be wondering what it's all for. Well, rest assured that this information is important, and we have tackled it for a reason. That's because knowing the way your brain works is what is going to allow you to increase your IQ through training, diet, and more. Hopefully, you've already seen some opportunities for us to maybe tweak and enhance our brain performance. Now, for instance, increasing dopamine can boost our memory and our focus. Likewise, you might have guessed that increasing the rate of our brain plasticity might also be a very positive thing. And those are exactly the topics we'll be tackling in the coming sections of this course. So stay with me and get ready to enhance your brain power. Okay, the first strategy you can use to increase your brain power is to use nootropics. Nootropics are smart drugs, which in turn can be described as both supplements and medications. Now, generally, anything that can enhance your mental performance in any given capacity can be considered a nootropic. But that means that technically, something like caffeine could be considered a nootropic because it makes us more focused, because it prevents us from needing to sleep, and because it helps us to memorize things. But more often the term is used to describe slightly more exotic and unusual substances. These include modafinil, for instance. Modafinil is a drug that was developed as a treatment for narcolepsy. And the idea was that it would be able to help people who used to stop falling asleep without warning. Since then, modafinil has proven highly effective at helping people who don't have narcolepsy. Not only can it almost eradicate tiredness completely, and not only can it enhance focus, but it also boosts memory and potentially reaction time. Word has it that 99% of CEOs in Silicon Valley are now using modafinil to get ahead. The term can also be used to describe the likes of L-theanine. L-theanine is a xanthine, like caffeine, that is a stimulant, but has a much gentler effect than caffeine. Think of this as caffeine without the jitters. Many people consume L-theanine and caffeine together, and the result is greater wakefulness and concentration, without the anxiety, headaches, and shaking that come with caffeine alone. Another highly popular nootropic, piracetam. This increases a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, which is an excitatory neurotransmitter that seems to play an important role in focus, memory, and attention. People who use this particular drug say that they experience music and colors more vividly. They are wittier and quicker in conversation, and they remember details more accurately. Now, of course, there are also plenty of stimulants such as Ritalin and Adderall, which are highly popular these days with students and with others who are studying. Now, at the other end of the spectrum are drugs like 5-HTP. 5-HTP is converted by the body into tryptophan and then into serotonin. This improves the mood and improves stress, which many people find makes them more productive and better at working, while at the same time making them happier and more social. Most people who use nootropics don't pick just one of these supplements either, but rather use a selection of them or a cocktail together in order to get the precise results they're looking for. Many will work well in conjunction. Now, for instance, if you use paracetam, then it is often recommended that you also take some form of choline, seen as the brain uses choline in order to formulate acetylcholine. It's confusing, and there's an awful lot to learn if you want to jump in, but there is a large active community already out there to help you if you do decide you want to learn more. And I would recommend, before you jump into this, that you do learn more on neurotropics. Well, let's talk a little more about nootropics. Do they really work like in the film Limitless? If you can take some supplements like these and become smarter, more focused, more productive, and all that, well, then the question is, why wouldn't you? Of course, as with all these things, the reality is not quite so simple as the pitch. See, the problem with all the nootropics I've just described is that they tend to favor specific neurotransmitters over others. And that's, unfortunately, a drastic oversimplification of how all this works. For instance, when you use something like modafinil, you are increasing the neurotransmitter called orexin. This is linked with our wake-sleep cycle, and thus it helps you to stay awake longer and to stay productive longer. Sounds great, but unfortunately, our wake-sleep cycle is also closely linked with various other cycles and biological rhythms in our body. Now, specifically, to be frank, it is linked with our appetite and our bowel movements and more. So, when you change your orexin, you can actually lose your appetite and end up going to the toilet, rather a lot. Likewise, if you use 5-HTP to increase your serotonin, you also end up affecting your appetite. And seeing as serotonin is converted eventually into melatonin, that's the sleep hormone, you can actually end up sleepy and groggy too, which is far from an effective way to improve your social skills. It just makes you less socially anxious. And when you increase dopamine with something like caffeine, this can prevent you from sleeping and lead to burnout. It can also indicate to your body that something very important is happening, which in turn can trigger a release of other excitatory neurotransmitters such as cortisol and such as adrenaline. Your heart can end up racing, you can feel anxious, and you can struggle to get to sleep. No neurotransmitter acts in a vacuum. Now, this is to say that you can't pick a single neurotransmitter to alter without expecting this to have profound effects across the brain and on countless other neurotransmitters, brain areas, and hormones as well. And with that in mind, it becomes very difficult to recommend these kinds of supplements and medications. That is why I recommend you do a lot of research before you make a decision there. Because what's more is that there is no neurotransmitter that is right for every single situation. You might take something to increase your dopamine, for instance, under the impression that this will then increase your focus and your memory. And who doesn't want that? And that is certainly true. It will do those things. But do you always want to increase your focus and your concentration? See, what you may not realize is that focus and creativity are somewhat inversely correlated. Now, that's to say that if you increase your focus, you may actually end up decreasing your creativity. Remember that web of neurons in your brain? Well, creativity comes from our ability to explore those different nodes or neurons and to find novel connections. Creativity really is simply the ability to recombine existent information in interesting new ways. You take two ideas or two concepts and you combine them, and then you have a new, novel concept. But if you increase your dopamine, you increase your focus on one specific brain area. You become more intensely focused on one concept or one collection of ideas, and in doing so, you lose the ability to make novel connections and to come up with new ideas. Now, not only this, but you also lose the ability to relax and to rest. So that when you finish work and you try to chill in the evening, you will still feel pent up and anxious. That means that you can end up feeling less rejuvenated the next day and thus find it harder to jump back into work. And the cycle builds. A healthy brain, now remember this, a healthy brain is not a brain that feels wired or highly focused. It is simply one that feels like it normally does, but better. You should have the ability to switch between different brain states and different modes at will. And nootropics, such as those we've described, patently do not help with this. They do help generally with what they promise, but they don't help with this. So finally, you need to consider the risk of tolerance and adaptation. This is the risk that your brain can adapt to the change in chemical balance and thereby become dependent on nootropics in order to function normally. Now, that's not good. So, how might this happen? Well, a good example is caffeine. When you drink caffeine, you reduce the action of a substance called adenosine. This happens because caffeine molecules are very similar in size and shape to adenosine. As such, they can end up getting trapped inside the same receptors and thereby preventing adenosine from being effective. Now, adenosine is a byproduct that is produced when our cells create energy. Now, this is created throughout the day as we think, as we engage, as we do any activity, etc. As an inhibitory neurotransmitter, it eventually starts to reduce activity in the brain, making us feel more and more relaxed and sleepy until we start to lose concentration and focus. But if you keep drinking caffeine in large doses, then the brain responds by creating more adenosine. It assumes that you have a chemical imbalance and it responds in kind. Therefore, you now find that you feel more tired and groggier when you aren't drinking caffeine, and you need even more tea or coffee in order to feel alert and awake. This creates addiction, and it is what leads to withdrawal symptoms when you stop getting enough caffeine. In fact, it has even been suggested that what most of us assume is sleep inertia, that tiredness we feel first thing in the morning, might in fact be simple caffeine withdrawal. So, should you use nootropics? Well, From me, it's not a definite no, seeing as you can actually benefit from being highly focused under the right circumstances. You know, you've got work that needs finishing very quickly, then a strong mug of coffee, well, that could potentially help. You just need to recognize the shortcomings and act appropriately. Don't use anything like this on a daily basis, and make sure that you only use it when absolutely necessary. And while you might protest about the potential side effects and risks, remember that plenty of people use alcohol and nicotine knowing full well that it is harming them. At least nootropics boost brain power on paper. Caffeine and many others are even protective against dementia and similar examples of age-related cognitive decline. Just make sure you are cautious when you start using nootropics. And don't break the law, simply. If you buy supplements or medications from illegal sources, then there is no telling what you may be ingesting. And if you want to get a brain boost from something you eat, well, then there is a better way. That's coming up. In the last few lectures, we discussed a very specific form of nootropic, the kind that alters neurotransmitters and makes you more focused or perhaps better at remembering particular things. But I left out several other categories of nootropics. One that is particularly interesting is the cognitive metabolic enhancer. And the other is anything that can generally be considered to be nutrition. So, the nootropics we looked at so far have been drugs or medications, usually things that are created in a lab. But how about something much simpler, like vitamin B6? Vitamin B6 helps the body to get more energy from protein and carbs, and this means it can enhance both physical performance and brain function. What's more is that it is also used in the creation of several neurotransmitters. So, it won't favor one over the other, but will instead help to enhance the production of brain chemicals across the board. So that's not going to interfere with creativity, right? There are so many more that do things like this. Consider, for instance, the role of omega-3 fatty acid. Omega-3 fatty acid is an oil found in fish that has two different benefits for the brain. The first is that it improves cell membrane permeability. That is to say that the body is able to use omega-3 in order to create the cell walls. This in turn then leads to greater fluidity in the cells. The cells are better able to move freely, to change shape, and to pass neurotransmitters and signals to one another. The result is that consuming omega-3 can actually help to enhance the transmission of signals across neurons and thereby speed up your thinking. Now, at the same time, omega-3 fatty acid also has the benefit of improving your omega-3-6 ratio. Now, to simplify that, omega-3 and 6 are both necessary for healthy function, but the vast majority of us get too much of the latter and not enough of the former. See, that's because omega-6 is used as a preservative in a vast range of different things we eat, whereas you mainly get omega-3 from oily fish, which is absent from many of our diets. There's an obvious reason why. It doesn't usually taste very good. When you have too much 6 and not enough 3, this causes brain inflammation, and inflammation has been linked with depression, brain fog, and more. How about creatine? Well, creatine is a substance that is typically associated with fitness and athletic activity. This supplement is used to enable the body to recycle ATP. ATP is adenosine triphosphate, or the most basic form of energy usable by the cells. We need ATP to move our muscles, but we also need it in order to think, or to do just about anything else. See, when we use ATP, it becomes AMP and ADPT. Creatine recombines these two substances to create more ATP for further use, thereby providing the brain with additional energy. This is very beneficial and has even been shown in studies to raise IQ. Then there are things like garlic and vinpocetine. These substances act as vasodilators. What's a vasodilator? Well, they actually expand the width of the veins and the arteries, thereby enhancing blood flow around the body and improving the delivery of nutrients to the brain and to the muscles. This means you'll feel more awake and more focused because you'll be getting more energy to the brain. Now, on top of that, nutrients will also make it to the brain more effectively. Now, there are countless more examples of this. Everything from CoQ10 to resveratrol, to vitamin C, to magnesium, to zinc. Countless nutrients, minerals, and vitamins can enhance brain function in different ways. And conversely, eating too many ready-to-eat meals and too much junk food can actually damage your brain function and cause it to start becoming slow and sluggish due to low energy, due to inflammation, and more. So, eating right is one of the simplest, but also one of the most powerful things you can do to enhance your brain function. And by that, I mean avoiding processed foods that are low on nutrition and high on additives, and meanwhile, gravitating toward nutrient-dense foods. Anything that you consider a superfood can potentially be very effective when it comes to enhancing your brain, enhancing all the functions your brain goes through. It'll also enhance your awareness. So make sure you are eating a healthy diet if you want to make the most of your brain. Meanwhile, try to ensure that you seek out these nutrients in particular. Number 1, omega-3 fatty acids. Choline, that's found in eggs. Amino acids, that's protein. Vitamin B complex, vitamin C, vitamin D, lutein, magnesium, and zinc. Talked about using nutrition and drugs to change the very way that you think. But what about good old brain training? What about the thing that most of you will likely have thought of first when asked if there was a way to enhance brain function? Brain training is actually big business. See, you don't need to look far at all to find apps, games, and books that promise to be able to improve your IQ and make you smarter through brain training. Now, very often these involve completing strange puzzles, playing unusual games, or performing math. Well, but as it turns out, brain training is something of a sham. Now, I'm being gentle, but stay with me. It isn't to say that it's not possible or that it can't be useful, but simply that, unfortunately, it is very often misrepresented and badly thought through. Because here's the thing. When you use brain training, such as Nintendo Brain Age or perhaps Lumosity, it turns out that you aren't really boosting your brain power in any tangible or useful way. What you're simply doing is improving your brain's ability to do that one thing. So, if you play a game where you have to pick out a number from a line of numbers, then you are simply improving your ability to pick a number out of a line of numbers. And most of us, I think, would agree that this isn't all that helpful or useful. See, brain plasticity is at work here. It's just that it isn't really helping with the thing we want it to help with. So how do you go about training your brain more generally? Well, first we're going to talk about accidental brain training. The rules of brain plasticity make it very easy for us to work out what impact a certain type of training will have on the brain. And we can actually use an acronym to work this out. It's called SAID. SAID stands for Specific Adaptation to Imposed Demands. Now, this is to say that your brain becomes better at doing the things you make it do regularly. That means that the best form of brain training to become better at focusing on your work, for instance, is to simply force yourself to focus on your work more. Do this often, and over time, you will become better at doing it. Want to become better at math? Then simply practice math more. Now, there are some tasks, though, that will help you to improve your brain in much more non-specific ways. These involve activities that have changing circumstances, but require the same basic skills. Now, and here's a surprise one. Now, you're looking at me and you're saying, this is coming from this guy? He's a little older. Well, computer games. See, computer games are actually among the very best brain training tools out there. In the next section, we'll see that they can be useful for enhancing brain plasticity simply because every new game requires you to learn new inputs, new rules, and new environments. But beyond this even, computer games are useful for just encouraging development in several key brain areas because of the skills that they require. See, action games, for instance, have been shown to increase your ability to tell different shades of gray and actually to improve your visual acuity. The reason for this is that shooters require us to be constantly looking at screen for signs of movement. Likewise, these games have been shown to help enhance decision making. Now that makes sense, doesn't it? And to increase the speed at which decisions are made without negatively impacting on the quality of those decisions. Now again, this comes from the requirement to be constantly making decisions as to which enemy should take priority, which way you should turn, which weapon to use, etc. Now, the difference between something like a computer game or something like brain training exercise is that a computer game is a much more varied experience and one that is far more closely relatable to our real world experiences. Now, just in decision making and so forth, we don't really go out and blow people away. Computer games provide realistic context and settings for our actions, and they challenge us in a dynamically shifting manner. Similarly, taking on new challenges at work, reading complex texts, and trying to learn new subjects and putting yourself in social situations that take you out of your comfort zone, well, all these things would be more effective at increasing your brain power than doing any mundane exercise, like picking a number out of a line. So, brain training is only so useful when it comes to boosting your brain power and works best when you go about it in less than conventional manners. But what if you take the underlying physical ability of the brain that enables brain training to work at all and then improve on that? See, what if you enhance brain plasticity? Well, ultimately, I believe that intelligence and even athletic performance boil down to two things: adaptability and opportunity. By adaptability, I am referring to the body's ability to change in response to certain stimuli. In the case of the brain, this means plasticity, the formation of new neural connections to correspond with new abilities and memories. By opportunity, I mean exposure or training. Take someone who is a fast learner and then give them an intensive training program, and you suddenly have a master musician, a programmer, a linguist, or a mathematician. Likewise, if you take someone whose muscles respond well to training and give them the right weightlifting protocol, they will stand a chance of becoming a professional bodybuilder. So, if the natural ability is missing or the training program is wrong, though, the individual will never become world class. Now, there's more to it, of course, but I believe that true genius is more a matter of creativity than mastery. I've worked with true geniuses and I can attest to that. And I feel that the right motivation and initial interest in learning also needs to be present. But for the most part, plasticity has a whole lot to answer for. So perhaps in the case that the best way to upgrade our mental prowess is to focus on that plasticity. By making our brains more adaptable, well, we then unlock the potential to learn faster and more efficiently and to thereby become smarter. We'll more quickly adapt to the mental demands of our surroundings and thus become better at thriving under those conditions. And it's true that with great plasticity comes amazing potential. Now, just look at Ben Underwood. Now, he can use a form of sonar for navigation. Ben lost his sight at the age of 3, and his brain adapted to the point where he was able to find his way around using clicks from his tongue. Now, imagine if you didn't have to lose your eyes to gain that kind of plasticity. Potentially, you could learn other incredible skills much faster. Perhaps you could become truly ambidextrous, develop savant-like math skills, or gain useful synesthesia, or learn to climb like the Monkey King. You could maybe redesign your brain to your liking, just as bodybuilders redesign their body. Okay, here's the program now. The first part of a protocol designed to enhance brain function would have to involve continually learning. It is my belief that this is one of the best ways to prevent age-related cognitive decline, to promote a good mood, and generally to enhance brain health. Now the problem is that many of us learn less and less as we age. After we leave that highly plastic childhood, we enter a stage where we are constantly learning through school and through social interactions. Following that, we learn to drive. We may go through higher education, and we'll develop ourselves through our careers. But come a certain age, our learning begins to slow down. There is less for us to learn and less for us to discover. Many of us find ourselves falling into a rut where our jobs involve repeating the same few actions, and our social interactions are limited to the same few friends and obviously the same family members. This is why you need to actively keep introducing new learning opportunities and keep reaching for things outside of your understanding. This is why places like Udemy are so important to us. See, this can be done also through your career, or it can be done as a hobby. Don't just focus on getting better at one hobby. Focus on expanding your repertoire. You'll not only become a polymath through force of will, but the continual learning will ensure it remains easy for you to pick up other new skills as the need arises. To encourage this, assign yourself a period of time every week to learn something new. This could be programming, or learning a language, or it could be learning to dance, or even challenging yourself to become ambidextrous. Better yet, continue to enroll in online courses. Okay, up next is movement. The most practical and effective way I can think to do this is through your strength training. Don't get so caught up in those video games we've been talking about that you neglect your strength training. This is one of the big advantages of using functional type training and doing things like climbing, learning martial arts, developing new lifts. Our brain responds especially well to learning when it is physical, as that is what our brain plasticity was originally for. So challenge yourself with new movement patterns and keep yourself nimble and agile both mentally and physically. Now the other method is through gaming. Yeah, I know, we're going to go back to playing computer games. Every single new computer game involves learning new rules and developing new muscle memory for quickly utilizing the controls. Computer games are the best we have for experiencing entirely new stimuli on a regular basis until virtual reality gets to the point it needs to. So, add that to your protocol. Make sure you are working out. Make sure that this incorporates new and different movements, and make sure that you include cardio and weightlifting. Use your body, or you'll not only lose the muscle, but all that neural tissue that controls it. Use your muscle in new ways, and your CNS will get into adaptation mode and play computer games. That's some pretty easy homework. Now, of course, you need to consider supplements. Okay, what are the best supplements for encouraging brain plasticity, you ask? Well, there are a few that are of particular interest to me right now and which make up my current plasticity stack. This includes another category of nootropics that can actually be beneficial to enhancing your brain function, And that doesn't just focus on making you feel wired all the time. Okay, we've talked about some of these already, but here's some new ones. How about lion's mane? That's long been one of the most popular for increasing nerve growth factor, which in turn has been linked to increased plasticity. Magnesium. Well, magnesium has been shown to increase plasticity. And magnesium threonate, in particular, appears to more successfully reach the brain, making it the best choice. How about turmeric? Turmeric has been shown to enhance plasticity. And in fact, I read that you could try adding it to your coffee. But if you do, don't hate me. That's all I'm going to say. And how about caffeine? Yep. Good old caffeine can also increase plasticity. It does this by enhancing dopamine, which is correlated with increased BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, remember? Now in plain English, caffeine makes things seem more important and more interesting, which makes the brain more likely to absorb and retain new information. Now lutein was shown a while back to improve the function of mitochondria, leading to greater energy and potentially a boost in cognitive performance. Well, it turns out it's also potentially able to increase plasticity, particularly in the womb, and including our development, but also later in life. There are plenty more, and TDCS has also been shown to be effective at increasing plasticity. Now, that's transcranial direct current stimulation. I'm not into that, I'm just suggesting it. But as we're looking at practical solutions to enhance your plasticity, let's focus on just those few that I mentioned earlier. You can afford to add this little stack to your routine, and it should result in enhanced adaptability. Discovery just must be part of your plasticity protocol. Being in any novel environment, discovering something new, or even speaking to someone new can help to encourage your plasticity. Interestingly, this has also been shown to be a trigger for accessing flow states. In other words, when you're somewhere novel or encountering something new, your brain wakes up, which encourages a flood of dopamine and thus BDNF. Traveling, talking to people with different points of view, and trying new things will help your brain to stay agile and more youthful rather than becoming all barnacled and set in its ways. An outward-looking brain is one that stays healthy, young, and plastic. So, follow this protocol and you will create a brain that is more plastic. From there, you can go on to learn much more complex subjects and even motor movements with relative ease. So, there you have it. A simple protocol for enhancing the very plasticity of your brain. Now, if you also combine this with the right kind of brain training, which is to say, focusing on things that you want to get better at, exercising, playing computer games, and learning, then you can expect to see greater returns than you would have enjoyed previously. It's as simple as that. Okay, we've looked at many aspects of brain training and how to enhance your brain power. We've discussed nootropics, brain plasticity, brain training, mindfulness and mindful meditation, and more. So, how do you put it all into practice? What are the takeaways here? Or maybe you might be saying, well, therefore what? Well, this is going to vary a fair amount from person to person. After all, we're all different. We all have different priorities when it comes to our mental performance, and we all have different tasks and jobs we need to perform and perform well. But on the whole, here's what you should keep in mind and what you should be using to achieve your ends, whatever those ends may be. Traditional brain training rely on focuses and on improving a specific set of skills. Please remember that. Now, with the possible exception of dual and back training, which is useful for building working memory capacity. You remember why? We're trying to match up two things at the same time. Computer games. Still shocked by that? Learning, exercise, and chess, all far more useful than brain training games. Nootropics that affect neurotransmitters can be useful for a focused burst of concentration, calmness, or creativity, but they are not a viable long-term solution. Neurotransmitters do not work in a vacuum. Okay, proper nutrition is important. However, especially where it can be used to enhance energy on a cellular level and where it supports the production of multiple neurotransmitters. Now, we discussed certain neurotropic nutrients that are useful for enhancing brain plasticity, leading to accelerated learning. You remember the list. Turmeric, magnesium threonate, lion's mane, lutein. We also talked about things that are good for brain plasticity. Get enough sleep at the right time. You want to be constantly learning new things. The potentiality of virtual reality is really going to help there. Exploring new places. Working memory is a truly transformative skill or ability and can be trained through visualization. And remember, meditation is a powerful tool for enhancing plasticity, working memory, and control over your mental state. Now, my recommendation for most people taking this course is to start by being more aware of the workings of your brain and to look after your nutrition as well as your sleep. Try to incorporate meditation into your routine, especially mindful meditation. Even just 5 minutes a day at the end of a workout is better than nothing. And be sure to keep pursuing new activities and learning new subjects. Consider adding plasticity stack or an energy stack for supplementation. And be more aware of how visualization is driving your mental state. Over time, your brain will grow and you will become smarter and more powerful than ever before. And this is a blatant advertisement, I guess, but a great place to start is to continue to enroll in Udemy courses. Train that brain. Another type of brain training that is useful and that is backed by a lot of evidence is the brain training game dual and back. The dual and back test is an exercise that requires you to concentrate on a sequence of numbers or letters that are also changing color. Your job is to press a button when you notice a match or a repetition. So in this sequence that you see, you would press the button because there were 2 10s. Now likewise, you would press the button during this sequence. You see, it's a dual end back because you are looking for 2 things at once. You see, because the colors match here. And n equals 1. So you are looking for matches that go back 1. But as the game progresses, the value of n increases. So if n equals 2, then you press the button when this appears. And you ignored the 2 black numbers that were only spaced 1 apart. Now, this is hard work, and it is effective because it requires you to hold information in your mind and then compare it with new information, tasking the working memory. Now, playing chess also requires you to test your working memory because you need to remember the positions of all the pieces on the board, and you need to think about possible positions several moves ahead. So the working memory then is the part of the memory that you use to hold on to temporary information, the information that you're currently working with. You see, this allows you to manipulate that information, and it is highly important for a vast range of different tasks and different activities. But what's really interesting is that working memory is actually a little more complex than we at first thought, and there may be even more useful ways to train it. So let's take a different look at working memory. Conventionally, when we view working memory as a store where we keep information briefly, moving it to short-term and then long-term memory, well, if you were asked to remember a phone number, then you place it in your short-term memory until you can write it down. Psychologists used to describe the size of the working memory as being 7 plus to minus 2, meaning that at the upper end we can remember 9 pieces of information. At the lower end we can remember 5. So if someone gives you a number 10 digits long, you shouldn't be able to remember it without assistance. It was also once thought that we had different modes for remembering this information. The visual spatial scratch pad, for instance, was what we used in order to picture the items in a room and remember their positions. Meanwhile, the phonological loop is what we use to remember acoustic information by repeating it back to ourselves. Okay, but more recent research suggests that working memory might be a little more complex than that. Now that's because working memory appears to have not all that much in common with other types of memory at all. In fact, there doesn't seem to be a brain area associated with working memory, and instead, it seems that working memory works by internalizing our thoughts and visualizing them. Now, let me explain that just a little bit. When you are trying to hang on to 7 numbers, you're not actually remembering them at all, but instead, you're visualizing them with your mind's eye. Brain scans show that if you imagine something happening, you actually light up the same brain regions as though you were really doing that thing. So for example, if you imagine playing football, you activate the areas of the motor cortex as though you were really carrying that ball. When you repeat numbers to yourself, areas of your auditory cortex light up. This is what working memory is really. It's not memory at all, but rather attention, the ability to internalize thought and then focus on that thought. And this makes working memory an incredibly important thing to train because it corresponds to your ability to visualize and to juggle and manipulate information. It allows you to plan ahead. It allows you to picture the positions of other players on the football field during the game. It allows you to juggle all the relevant information when in conversation to give the best response. It even allows you to manipulate a map in your mind's eye for improving navigation. In short, working memory is one of the key skills to enhance for better performance across the board. And because it actually amounts to visualization, that makes visualization itself worth practicing. And because it also amounts to concentration, that too is something you need to practice focusing on. Now, this is your ability to focus on your internal constructs, which in turn gives you the ability to manipulate and manage information in your mind. Now, does that sound like key information? Let's go on. Meditation is one of the best things you can do to encourage more brain plasticity, and it has been shown in studies to increase cortical thickness and gray matter. Moreover, it has also been shown to be one of the most effective tools for strengthening your working memory. Now, the reason for this is that meditation essentially boils down to nothing more than applied concentration and focus. Now, I acknowledge many of us think that meditation has some kind of esoteric subtext, but the reality is that it is actually very simple and very practical. Meditation is simply the conscious decision to empty your mind, to focus on just one stimulus, just as a mantra or like visualization. So in doing this, you actually quiet all your other brain areas and they begin to shut down. This has the benefit of slowing brain waves, meaning that there is overall less activity across the brain. And it means that you can overcome stress and trigger the rest and digest state. At the same time, though, it also means you become better at choosing what you want to focus on. Not only does this boost your mental focus and your ability to concentrate, but it also means that you gain greater working memory. I also acknowledge that starting meditation is difficult for many people. But if you're struggling, try committing to just 5 minutes a day after your workout to begin with, working up to 30 minutes as your first plateau, and then you go from there. What exactly is mindfulness? Essentially, mindfulness is a form of meditation that has been adopted by CBT, you remember, cognitive behavioral therapy, a psychotherapeutic approach that can be used to treat all manner of psychological conditions like anxiety, phobias, addictions, etc. Mindfulness essentially gives us a tool that we can use to not only calm our thoughts and escape the stressors of the day, but also reflect on the contents of our mind in the interest of self-improvement. Meditation generally has something of a bad reputation, I know that. Unfortunately, a lot of people associate it with religion or esoteric ideas, and they think they can't meditate unless they're spiritual. Now, this can be off-putting for someone who doesn't hold any religious beliefs or who doesn't like esoteric ideas in general. But in fact, you can practice meditation whether you are religious or an atheist. All meditation is a directed and focused attempt to control your thoughts and the content of your mind, and thereby to gain some peace and quiet, or at least to be able to better understand the contents of your own brain. Often, this means completely silencing all thoughts. Many types of meditation, such as transcendental meditation, instruct you to think of absolutely nothing. And often this is achieved by focusing on your breathing, a mantra, or a physical object like a candle flame. This can be difficult for beginners though, as they constantly find their mind wandering. Now, the idea behind mindfulness meditation then is not to try and empty your thoughts, but instead to simply step back and observe them like a detached third party. This way, you aren't letting your thoughts affect you and make you stressed, but you also aren't going to struggle with not being allowed to think anything. Meanwhile, using this technique will also allow you to become more aware of your own thoughts and thereby able to edit any thoughts that are leading you into trouble. For instance, if you constantly find yourself thinking about the ways that you could hurt yourself, you might notice that this is a bad habit, and then you attempt to fix it. This may be the long-term aim of mindfulness when used in CBT. In the short term, though, we are simply to use it to remove ourselves from our thoughts and emotions so that we can get some calm and thereby recover, ready to tackle the day ahead. This is what mindfulness refers to in most cases, but it also has been appropriated to mean a lot more. If mindfulness means being more aware of your thoughts, then it can also be applied outside of meditation and to the way you go about your day. In this case, mindfulness simply means being mindful of what you're focusing on and what you're thinking at any given point. This is useful because very often you'll find that your mind isn't perhaps where it should be. Okay, let me give you an example. If you are walking through a beautiful scenic woodland, but you are thinking about work, then as far as your body is concerned, you may as well be at work. In this case, mindfulness can be used simply to make yourself more aware of where you are and to actually focus on what's around you. Now that means feeling the breeze on your skin, looking at the beautiful flowers, and smelling the fresh air. When you do all that, you will benefit much more from the experience. Now, likewise, you can use mindfulness to direct your attention to all manner of other things. For example, how about your physical sensations? Often, we aren't aware of just how we're sitting, how we're standing, or how we're feeling. Take a moment right now to reflect on this. How comfortable are you at the moment? Does any part of your body hurt? If you're sitting down, Where do you feel the most pressure on your body? Can you feel your clothes against your body? Maybe you can feel a watch on your wrist. How warm are you? Are you leaning more to one side? This kind of mindfulness can be useful if you want to try and fix your posture, but also if you want to improve your abilities in sports or just move more efficiently. Being more mindful of the way you speak can meanwhile help you speak more eloquently. To stop using derogatory words, to stop swearing, or to change the whole way that people perceive you. Here's another example then. If you want to sound more intelligent, then you can simply try using bigger words or speaking a little more slowly. You can also use mindfulness to be happier in everyday life. Simply try to stop letting negative emotions affect you by identifying them as temporary and destructive. You can simply notice that you're getting angry and acknowledge that your thoughts will be tainted by that. With practice, this can make you a much calmer and much happier person. Here is an exercise for you to use to work on those destructive negative thoughts and emotions. But what do you find when you try and do this? In all likelihood, you'll find that you forget. This is just the same way that you forget to pick up bread when you are supposed to and you forgot. And it's just the same way you forget to pick up your keys on the way out of the house. The point is, most of the time we have no control over what we're focused on or what we're paying attention to. And as such, we find ourselves forgetting things, getting into bad habits, or stressing when we should be enjoying ourselves. Practicing mindfulness both as a form of meditation and during the day can therefore help you to improve your ability to control your thoughts and thereby to decide how you want to improve yourself and what you want to focus on. In the next lecture, we are going to go through an exercise to help you in eliminating negative, destructive thoughts. You might not be able to get rid of all negative thoughts, but it can help to at least minimize them. See, when your mind is bombarded by negativity, it makes it difficult to focus or even appreciate the good things in your life. This can affect nearly every aspect of your life. Now, stay with me here to find out how to stop some of these negative thoughts from taking over. First of all, ignore the extremes. See, extremes are when you think of something in the best or worst scenario. Most things in life aren't so black and white. So it is important that most of your thoughts are somewhere in the gray area. Sure, something might not turn out as good or bad as you thought, but most likely there is some type of shining moment in just about everything. Don't think extreme lows, such as something being the worst or completely fail. Try to think of the potential good and possible drawbacks of any situation or scenario, and suddenly you won't be quite as negative with your thought patterns. Now, the reverse of that is to surround yourself with positivity. The people you spend time with can have a larger impact on how you think and feel than you might ever imagine. Even though mindfulness essentially only has to do with you and your own thought patterns, others can definitely influence its effectiveness. See, it's important that you try to surround yourself with as much positivity as possibly can. You may not want to get rid of negative people completely, but reduce how much time you spend with them. Spend more of your time with those that exude optimism and always seem to have a good way to look at everything. Okay, now, name the thoughts and say goodbye to them. Now, this is a fun imaginary exercise that is great for those nagging negative thoughts you just can't seem to get rid of. Think of the most negative thoughts that always seem to consume your mind and bring your mood down, and give them all a name. They can be anything you want, as long as you can remember and identify them. Now close your eyes and picture the names you have come up with for those thoughts. Then send them away. Turn them into balloons in your mind and watch as those balloons fly away, never to return. Now, another step is to focus on the positive. Now, this seems like an obvious suggestion, but it goes deeper than just appreciating the good things in your life. It is much easier to focus on the bad than the good. Don't know why. So what you want to do is stop minimizing the positive things in your life. Really focus on the good things, whether it is a new relationship, a job, your favorite place, a good book, absolutely anything that brings you joy, happiness, and optimism. Okay, so that's mindfulness in a nutshell. The next question is, how do you start using it? Well, that exercise in negative thinking was a great start. Another option is to use online guided meditations. These are simply recordings that instruct you on what to do as you try meditating. Now, for example, they might tell you to close your eyes and breathe in and out through the nose. Then they might tell you to think about your body. One particularly good tool that does this is the Headspace app, and it can be downloaded for Android or iOS, but which is also available to use through the web. This will talk you through numerous guided meditations, but only the first 10 are free. Still, you can learn enough from those 10 to then thrive without the app. Generally, though, most mindfulness meditations will take a very similar procedure, and you can go through the steps then without necessarily needing to be talked through it again. And in fact, if you can do your meditation without guidance, then you should find that you're actually more effective at it, because you won't be continuously interrupted by someone's voice. Okay, now let's go over what the steps will generally be for a mindfulness meditation session. The final lectures in this section walk you through a meditation session. So for now, I'm just trying to get you familiar with the concept. We've gone over some of this in other sections, so it may sound familiar. But step one, breathing. The first thing to do is to start breathing. You can do this using something called equal breathing from yoga. Here, you breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth. As you do, you hold each inhalation and exhalation for 3 seconds. Hence the equal bit. See, these long draws in and long exhalations will allow you to completely fill the lungs with fresh oxygen and then expel all the CO2. Now, but to be honest, you can use any kind of breathing so long as it is slow, deliberate, and full. The guidance they give on the Headspace app, for instance, is simply to breathe loud enough so that the person next to you would be able to hear you. Now, why breathing? Well, essentially, breathing slowly is the best way to indicate to the body that the coast is clear and you're safe. See, we breathe quickly when we're stressed to get more oxygen moving around our bodies, and we can breathe more slowly when we are relaxed. Thus, breathing deeply and slowly will help us to exit the fight or flight state and to instead enter the rest and digest state. Now, this should fix our heart rate variance, reduce cortisol, and get us ready to enter a relaxed state. Step 2, senses. Now, next, you are often told to focus on your physical senses. This means noticing the smells, sounds, and even the temperature around the room. Your eyes will normally be closed, so sight is ruled out of this one. The objective here is not to look for sounds or strain to hear them. Instead, just notice the sounds that you wouldn't normally notice. You might find that you can hear creaking in the house. Maybe you can hear the neighbors. Maybe you can hear the rain outside or the wind. There are probably far off birds and maybe even traffic. This is always a fantastic example of how little we normally pay attention to and how much richer our experience becomes when we practice mindfulness. It's also a great way to get into that habit and to start relaxing the body even more. Step 3, do a body scan. Now, body scan meditation is sometimes described as being its own thing, but it can be used as part of any meditation session. The idea here is to simply become more aware of your own body, as we described earlier, but to do this by systematically starting at the top of the head and then moving gradually through to the toes, noticing how you feel at each stage. If you want to use this process to get to sleep, then it can be a great tool for that purpose too. The best way to do this, though, is to try completely relaxing the muscles by first tensing and then releasing each part of your body as you move through it. What you'll find is that you can carry large amounts of tension everywhere from your face muscles to your neck to your arms and legs. Once you recognize this and then let it go, you'll feel far more relaxed. And eventually this can enable you to fall into a deep and restful sleep. For now, though, we're just scanning the body and using this as a way to become more mindful of ourselves and to begin the process of introspection and self-directed attention. Step 4 is focus on breathing. After noticing each part of the body, return to the chest and pay particular attention to the way it rises and falls. As you do this, you can also take this opportunity to fix your breathing. See, chances are that when you first notice your own breathing, you'll find that you are breathing in so that your chest expands first. But in fact, it should be more your abdomen that moves first, and this should then be followed by your chest. Correct breathing, called abdominal breathing, should start by allowing the stomach to relax and protrude, and then filling the lungs. This is effective because the process opens up space in your abdominal cavity. This then allows the lungs to expand into that space, which is then followed by them expanding upwards through your chest as well. This type of breathing allows you to take in more oxygen and to thus trigger even more relaxation hormones. See, most of us don't use this kind of breathing, though, because we have hunched postures which fold our stomach and prevent us from being able to breathe from there. Well, the result is that we end up breathing much, much shallower and taking faster breaths, which actually increases stress and cortisol. Now, don't stress out about it. We're going to take care of it. Just notice your own breath and take this opportunity to count your breaths as you come in and out. See, this is the part that is going to work a little like transcendental meditation by quieting down a lot of the activity throughout the brain. Okay, we're up to step 5. Let your mind wander once you get going. See, once you've done this for a little while and you're feeling particularly still, it's time to just let go of your mind and let it do whatever it wants. Now your aim is not to try and control or silence your thoughts. Instead, you simply let your mind wander naturally, or stay completely still if it wants to. The description that is often used is that you're watching thoughts go by like clouds. Headspace describes your thoughts in these cases as being more like cars in the road. It emphasizes the importance of watching the cars go past, but not running out into the road to chase the traffic. This is all about detached observation. After you have done this for a while, you can simply allow your mind to gradually return to normal and gently open your eyes. Well, a lot of people, and maybe you're one of them, try to start meditating but end up failing. Now, why is this? Well, one problem is that too many of us want to get immediate results and expect to feel instantly different. When this doesn't happen, we end up frustrated and stressed. Now, this is the worst attitude you can possibly take to mindfulness meditation. See, the whole point is that you are to let your mind do whatever it wants. As soon as you start forcing it in one direction or another, you will lose that all-important freedom and start producing stress hormones. Now, likewise, try not to get too upset with yourself if you try this and your mind keeps wandering or you keep getting distracted. If you get itchy, it's fine to scratch your face. If you need a glass of water, get up and get one. Don't try and force anything. Just let yourself be as you are. Now, if you really want help jump-starting your progress, though, then you should consider priming yourself. Now, priming is a term used in psychology that simply refers to preparing the brain in a certain way. Sometimes that means influencing the answers we give to questions by showing certain stimulus. But in other cases, it means changing our emotions. Now, in this case, it pays to do something calming, but that nevertheless requires focus just before you try meditating. So, for example, you might try relaxing in a beautiful but novel location. Novel scenery increases neurotransmitters and hormones associated with focus, while being in natural environments has been shown to make us more relaxed and to encourage slower brain waves. Finally, don't be too ambitious regarding how often you intend to meditate. Another classic mistake is to set out with the idea that you're going to meditate for 30 minutes every day. This, I promise you, is destined for failure unless you currently spend 30 minutes of every day bored out of your mind. Start with something small, even just 5 minutes before you get out of bed. And then you can build on this habit. Mindfulness and cognitive restructuring go together like chutney and cheese. In CBT, mindfulness is usually used in conjunction with cognitive restructuring to the point that they are inseparable. Using mindfulness meditation and mindfulness in waking life is going to help you learn to step back from your emotions, and over time, you'll find that you become calmer, more focused, and happier. But it can be used for so much more once you recognize the power this tool has for bringing about change. See, the point is that once you identify negative thoughts that are negatively affecting your life, you can now change them. And that's where cognitive restructuring comes in. Now, we've talked a little about CBT many times in this course, but let's just briefly go over it again. CBT is today the most popular option for treating mental illness among most major health organizations. The approach was introduced relatively recently and is a natural extension of another school of psychology that reigned previously. It goes clear back to the 50s. That school was behaviorism and was entirely defined by the notion of conditioning and association. Now, the idea was that if you experienced two stimuli at the same time often enough, they would eventually become linked in your mind. Now, today we know this to be true. You remember the section on mastering your brain? We learned that neuroplasticity, neurons that fire together, wire together. This means that if two neurons fire at the same time often enough, they eventually grow a very strong connection which might cause the other to fire involuntarily. This was demonstrated famously by Pavlov, who experimented on dogs. He rang a bell whenever he fed the canine participants, and over time, this created an association via positive reinforcement. Ultimately, this led the dogs to salivating whenever the bell was rung. As far as their brains were concerned, bell equals food. This same idea was then applied to human psychology. The hypothesis was that we could learn phobias, for example, by associating negative experiences with harmless objects. Likewise, it was theorized that you could treat a phobia via reassociation. If you classically condition someone to associate that stimulus with positive things again, they would eventually lose the phobia. And this method was proved successful in various studies. Behaviorism went a little too far, though, in that it claimed that every aspect of human experience was learned this way. We learned how to gesture because when we reached for things as babies, people passed them to us. We learned to walk because we kept falling over when we did it wrong. We could go on and on. Everything we did then was believed to be entirely motivated by the reward centers of our brain, which in turn helped us form new associations and develop new behaviors. The things we didn't learn ourselves directly, we might learn vicariously through social conditioning. Just watching others, for example. For years, this idea reigned supreme, but eventually it started to lose favor as it was unable to explain every aspect of our psychology. Ultimately, it became apparent that there must be an additional internal element. And this is where the cognitive bit comes in. CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, then takes behaviorism and applies the idea that you can also reinforce experiences, both positive and negative, by thinking about them. For instance, you can learn to be afraid of heights even if you've never fallen from a height. How? Well, by constantly thinking about how bad it might be to fall from a height. In other words, If you keep imagining that falling must be dangerous, and if you tell yourself things like, those railings don't look safe, then you can cause yourself to be afraid. What's more, each time you think something like this, and then stay away from the height as a result, you are essentially reinforcing that belief just as though you had fallen. So, simply put, the idea behind CBT is to use the principles of behaviorism, but to combine these with the cognitive aspect. That means not only using elements like reassociation, but also thinking cures. So, one example of this to use in mindful meditation might be simply by choosing not to let your thoughts and emotions affect you. You can become less controlled by them and thereby less susceptible to your own fears and ruminations. But there are many more aspects to this too, and these tend to fall under the heading of cognitive restructuring, or in other words, just changing your thoughts. Well, let's come up with an example here. It's called thought challenging. Here, you simply break down one of your thoughts or beliefs and thereby assess just how accurate it is. Now, for instance, you might find that you are afraid of public speaking because you think people will laugh at you if you stutter. This is a debilitating belief that is ironically making you much more likely to stutter. What you need to do in order to overcome this is to look at the thought and ask, is it realistic? What you'll find 90% of the time is that this belief is unlikely and unfounded. See, most people would not be harsh enough to laugh at you if you stuttered. And even if they did, it wouldn't matter because you wouldn't see them ever again. Perhaps you might feel lame or like a loser if you stutter and people laugh. Again, you should assess that. Being able to confidently talk however it comes out and not care about the outcome is actually a sign that you're very confident and aloof. Now, another example is one that marries the ideas from CBT with more traditional notions from behaviorism. This one is called hypothesis testing. Now, essentially, it means that you're testing your theory to work out whether or not it really holds up. If you're afraid people will laugh if you stutter during public speaking, that means you need to purposefully stutter on stage and let everyone see it. This will then, in turn, show you what happens in that scenario. And what you'll likely discover is that nothing happens. People are kind, and they'll just wait for you to finish and start again. So now you know how to use mindfulness, and you know how to use cognitive restructuring. Hopefully, you've also been able to guess how the two might be linked. We use mindfulness in order to identify the negative thoughts, and then we apply cognitive restructuring in order to change them. Now, I strongly urge you to identify a negative thought, apply cognitive restructuring, and make a change. I think you will find it doesn't necessarily happen overnight, but it will happen, and that's a great success to stick in your quiver for the next negative thought you want to work on. This system has been used for a while now in order to treat things like phobias, anxiety disorders, addictions, and much more. But what if you don't have any of those problems and you're completely fine? Well, in that case, we can still use cognitive restructuring. Because the thing is, you can actually use cognitive restructuring to improve aspects of your thought process that aren't broken. Now, in other words, this isn't just a tool for healing, but it's also a tool for self-improvement. And there are countless ways you can use it to make yourself calmer, more confident, and more productive. Likewise, there are many things that are similar to cognitive restructuring, but don't technically fall under the same heading. Now, we'll be returning to this concept more in future lectures, but for now, let's look at some alternative ways to control your thought patterns and some alternative motives for doing it. Oftentimes we think of fear and anxiety as being short-term responses to situations or stimuli. But in fact, our fear and anxiety can be much longer term and affect our decision-making, goal setting, and decisions. I refer once again to Tim Ferriss's book, The 4-Hour Work Week, where he proposes a concept called fear setting as a tool you can use to overcome your fears and thereby start getting what you want out of life. Now let's say you're thinking of starting a new job, taking a career break so you can go traveling, or starting your own business. You've been thinking of doing these things for a long while, but the problem is that you're too afraid to do it because you think you'll end up without a job, or without a partner, or both. Now surely, if you leave your current job to go traveling, you won't be able to get a job on your return, right? And the longer you're unemployed, the more unemployable you'll become. Eventually, your partner will become sick and tired of scraping by because of a stupid decision you made, and they'll leave you. Then your house will be repossessed, and then you'll end up homeless and alone. Now, that might all sound very over the top, but this is the kind of thing we actually think on an unconscious level all of the time. And the reason we think it is that humans are naturally very risk averse. We evolved in the wild where risk would generally mean lions. As such, we learn to become more sensitive to risk and defend our assets more than we go after new assets. But today, risk is very rarely anything life-threatening. More likely, risk will mean getting shouted out, but we blow it out of proportion because we're risk-averse people. By now, you should hopefully be able to guess what's coming next. Thought challenging. We're going to take these beliefs and fears and challenge them by looking at just how realistic each one of them are. And Tim Ferriss's technique is perfect for this. So first, as an exercise, think about what it is you want to do and why you want to do it. Now, think about all the things that are right now holding you back from taking the plunge and giving it a go. If we're talking about taking a career break, then your list of fears and reasons might look something like this. Now's not a good time. You don't have enough money. You don't want to leave your partner for that long. You're afraid your job won't be there when you get back. You're afraid you won't be able to find subsequent employment. You're afraid that you might ultimately end up destitute, in debt, and or homeless. Okay, now, Let's assess each of these beliefs. To do that, we're looking not only at how likely they are, but also how you would cope if it were to happen. Think of contingencies and things you can do to prevent them from being likely. First one, now's not a good time. You don't have much money. Well, there's never actually a good time, and if you travel smart, you don't need much money. You can work online while you travel. You actually won't need that much money. Now is probably better than later. You're younger right now. You don't want to leave your partner for that long. Well, they probably don't mind. If it's important to you, then it's something you have to do. And it's preferable to feeling resentful toward your partner because they've prevented you from seeing the world. Now, what about you're afraid your job won't be there when you get back? Well, chances are it probably will. You can discuss this with your employer. Another question is, do you love your job that much? Or you're afraid you won't be able to find subsequent employment? Well, depending on your age, this is highly unlikely. If you're skilled, then travel will simply add to your CV. You could even find a new job and agree to start that later on while you're out traveling. If necessary, then you can take a part-time job or start a side business to tide yourself over. Now, what about you're afraid that you might ultimately end up destitute, in debt, or homeless? Well, you can live on savings for a long time. And you can earn money in other ways. You probably have parents or friends who would take you in long before you went homeless. Now think about the alternative. Do you want to never go traveling? Do you want to spend every single day stuck in that office without ever accomplishing the things you want to accomplish? Let this motivate you more than the fear, and now make the decision to take the plunge. Now, the same technique can help you to make the decision to start a new career, to move to a new country, or to do all the countless other things that you've been dreaming of doing. So, in this case, we've used thought challenging again to break down our fears so that we can go after whatever we want in life. But another method you can use is to acknowledge those fears as real, but just find a strategy that minimizes the risk. So now, in this part of the lecture, we'll look at a technique you can use to do in dating that will give you the confidence to approach and date everyone. So let's say that you're an average awkward guy. You go to bars regularly with friends, hoping to pull, but you're too afraid to approach the people on the dance floor. Why? Because you're worried they'll reject you, and you'll thus end up feeling incredibly awkward. Now, that's a genuine concern, although we could ask why it matters. So it's hard to deny it out of hand. Well, the simple solution, minimize the risk and remove your likelihood of failing. To do this, you can simply assess the situation before you approach anyone. So hang back away from the bar and chat with friends. As you do, just look around the place for people you're interested in. And if you see someone, smile at them while making eye contact. If they're interested, then you can bet they're going to smile back. If they're absolutely not interested, they'll probably just look away, and you'll know about it. But in either situation, you haven't lost face, and you can still hold your head high. There's nothing to be afraid of. Now, If they've smiled though, then you can probably relatively safely approach them. That doesn't mean they're necessarily into you, but it means they at least are open to the idea of chatting with you. So the next step is to head over in your group of friends to talk to their group of friends. Don't speak to them only. Speak to the whole group so you simply come across as someone friendly, someone outgoing and interesting. Now likewise, let your friends mingle with their friends too. When you get a moment, try to spend a bit more time chatting with the person you were initially interested in and who gave you the go-ahead to come over by smiling. If the conversation is going well with the person you're interested in, then you can step it up a notch by simply offering to buy them a drink. This is a very clear signal that you're interested in them. And so they probably won't say yes unless they're interested back. Now they're away from the group. You can talk to them on their own and assess the situation. Now finally, ask if they want to dance. And if they say yes, take the same approach. Dance more and more closely until eventually you're completely sure it's okay to make the move. Now in this situation, you have now approached someone attractive in a bar, but at no point is there any danger of rejection. If they don't want to talk to you, they won't smile. If they aren't interested when you come over, they'll make excuses and you can talk to their friends. If they change their minds, they can say no to the drink. If you're giving off the wrong signals, then they can say no to the dance. But at no point have you embarrassed yourself, and you haven't done anything that you can't bounce back from. Think about other things that you're afraid to do in your life. Assess why it is you're afraid, and then think of ways you can get around that fear by avoiding the worst case scenario. And oh, by the way, when you go over to talk to this person, listen to this person. People love to tell you about themselves. They really don't want to hear about you. Well, we're less than halfway through this section, and already you should have picked up some pretty useful skills. For instance, you now know how to enter a mindful state at any given time to better appreciate your surroundings, or at least just to escape stress for a few moments of respite. But let's rewind and look at that stress in a little bit more detail. What is it about stress that makes it so serious? Why are we trying to combat stress? And is stress always bad? Well, actually, stress is something that is sorely misunderstood by a lot of people. Stress is not really one thing. Rather, it is a full spectrum of responses that occur in response to dangerous situations. Now, essentially, when you detect danger, your body responds by releasing hormones and neurotransmitters that trigger the fight or the flight response. This is the response that I described earlier, and it is modulated by the following hormones or transmitters. See, neurotransmitters are like hormones, but they affect the brain more directly and don't last as long. Now, just look over this list. We've talked about these in at least 3 other sections that I know of. Why are they so important? Well, because this is how our brain functions, remember? Okay, so then, these then together cause a number of symptoms that you should be familiar with if you've ever gotten into an argument, into a fight, or into a dangerous predicament? And if you haven't, who are you? Now these symptoms include, and you've probably experienced every one of them. If you haven't, again I ask, who are you? You experience a sense of dread, racing thoughts, your body shakes, your muscles contract, your veins widen, you have increased heart rate, your pupils dilate, you have a resistance to pain, suppression of the immune system and the digestive system so that more blood and resources can be sent to the brain and muscles. You have an increased sensitivity to sounds and light, or you experience tunnel vision. You experience rapid breathing and sweating. Increased blood viscosity to encourage the blood to clot in case of an injury. In short, our body goes into a high performance mode by diverting energy and supplies away from maintenance tasks and less immediately urgent processes. Our strength, speed, and ability to fight or climb increase, and this makes us more powerful and better able to respond. This response evolved in the wild in order to help us protect ourselves in case of danger. If we saw a predator, or if we saw a forest fire, then these changes would help us escape. Likewise, we would become better fighters when competing with members of our own species for resources. And sometimes in the modern world, this response can be exactly what we need. If a mugger pulls a knife on you, then this will give you the best chance of running away to live another day. Now, there is something known as chronic stress. See, the problem comes when the threat isn't a physical threat and when it isn't an immediate threat. We simply live in a world that we didn't evolve for, and this means that many of our systems are essentially outdated. For example, if you're giving a speech, then your body will react in just the same way as it would if you saw a forest fire. And in this case, none of the changes would help at all. You'd be more likely to stutter, and you'd look sweaty, and your voice might even change. And if you panic, sometimes stress can feel like a heart attack, then this can eventually create a vicious circle, causing you to get more and more and more stressed, eventually hyperventilating and passing out as a result. This is what happens in the case of an anxiety attack. Moreover, this is also how we respond to being in debt, or hating our jobs, or waiting to hear back about an offer we put on a house. But we can't run away from these problems, and we can't fight them. And this then means that the fight or flight response can continue on a low level for a long duration of time. This is what we call chronic stress, and it's bad for all kinds of reasons. Well, for starters, chronic stress means that our immune system and digestion are suppressed for long periods of time. This can lead to malabsorption as we become less able to extract extra nutrients from our food. And it can prevent us from sleeping and make us more immune to disease. Now, what's more, eventually this stress can cause us to run out of catecholamine. That's a neurotransmitter that allow us to focus. This is called adrenal fatigue, and it's linked with depression and chronic anxiety. Now, note as well that no neurotransmitter and no hormones work in a vacuum. If you increase one, you alter others. And when you increase cortisol, that's associated with chronic stress in particular, you also increase another hormone called ghrelin. That's the hunger hormone. This also encourages something called lipogenesis, meaning that more of the fuels in your diet will be stored as fat rather than used for energy. In fact, cortisol even breaks down muscle by producing something called myostatin, which signals the body to break down muscle for energy. So it's important for your physique as well that you learn not to feel stressed when it's not useful. This is why it's so important that we learn to respond appropriate to the situation at hand and to suppress stress when it isn't appropriate, so that we can carry on enjoying life and staying healthy. And guess what? Mindfulness is a path to that eventuality. If you don't believe that yet, stay with me. Now we're going to talk about a thing called positive stress. The aim here is not to completely remove stress from our life. Rather, it is just to control it. As we've already seen, stress is a positive tool if you're trying to enhance your physical performance. If you're in a race, or if you're surfing, then this response is exactly what you need in order to get things done. But the ideal situation would be that you get all the benefits of the fight or flight response without the negatives. Now imagine if you could gain that focus and that increased muscle mass, but without the sense of dread and fear. Well, as it happens, just such a state may exist. This is what psychologists call a flow state, and it tends to be triggered during moments where we are highly focused on something that we also actually enjoy. Now, the example given most often is extreme sports, where some athletes describe the world seeming to slow down around them while they pull off amazing moves and feel more alive than they ever have done. We also experience flow when we're completely focused on the work we're doing, or when we're so deep in concentration that we forget the time and speak through the night. During this state, we produce similar neurotransmitters and hormones, but with the addition, another one called anandamide, the bliss hormone, that is also connected to abstract and creative thinking. Now, it's actually the same chemical that gives marijuana its effect. But what most people don't know is that it's also produced naturally in the brain. Now remember, this isn't really just one state, but rather a spectrum. We can be slightly stressed, and we can be very stressed. We can be slightly alert or very alert. We can be alert and angry, alert and happy, or alert and scared. It's useful to think of the brain in terms of states, but just be aware that there are countless states in between as well, and it's more likely that you're somewhere here on the spectrum. Flow states help us to perform our best and focus more, but they don't cause the same negative effects as a typical fight or flight. The difference? Enjoyment. So, if you can try to tap into the enjoyment of what you're doing and see it as a fun challenge rather than something terrible, then you're more likely to get into that flow. Find the fun in what you're doing. Find what you're passionate about in it and learn to actually enjoy it. You can do all this using very similar strategies to the cognitive restructuring we've already been talking about. And likewise, you also need a low level of eustress. Eustress is the equivalent of chronic stress, but is once again a more positive form. Eustress is a kind of stress that motivates us to do things. Now, for example, if you have an exam coming up and you don't experience any stress at all, then there is a good chance that you're not going to study for it. And as such, you're not going to get a very good grade. Having just the right amount of low-level stress is what you need to make sure you start studying early and do the best that you can. Eustress doesn't just have to mean negative motivation. It can also mean positive motivation. Now, for instance, stress that you might not achieve the things you really want to achieve. It's stress, but it's based around something positive. Then there's yet another type of stress that can unlock even more physical and mental potential. Now, I'm not saying that anyone is going to be able to train themselves to the point where they can access this potential. All I'm saying is that it exists, which is highly interesting and hopefully outlines the possibilities that exist and the reason that accessing more of your mind and your emotions is so potentially powerful. So with that in mind, and the things you learned about the brain, the first example is something called a flashbulb memory. This demonstrates the ability we have to memorize things in vivid detail if we think the event is important enough. Think back to where you were at the time you first heard of the 9/11 attacks, or perhaps where you were when you first heard about Michael Jackson. Alternatively, consider a moment that was particularly important in your own life, for good or for bad. Chances are that you can remember these events in far more accurate detail than you can other parts of your biographical memory. This is what's known as flashbulb memory. Partly, this is the result of repeated rehearsing. When something important happens, we play it over and over and over again in our minds. But it's also the result of neurotransmitters being released that change the way the memory is laid down and makes these connections seemingly stronger. Then there's crisis strength. Crisis strength, also known as hysterical strength, is the name given to incidents where people suddenly tap into incredible strength. Now, the classic example here is the mother who manages to lift a vehicle off their trapped child underneath. How is that even possible? While there is very little in the way of scientific research looking at this phenomenon, there is a real theory as to how it might work. When you contract your muscle normally to lift something, your brain sends signals that travel through your central nervous system and to the neuromuscular junction. Acetylcholine, yes, that's a neurotransmitter, is released, and this causes muscle fibers to fire. Only we're never quite able or capable of recruiting 100% of those muscle fibers. On average, we recruit around 30% of them, and even a trained athlete will only be able to get up to around 50%. This is thought to be an evolutionary limitation, the idea being that recruiting 100% of our muscle would leave us completely exhausted and vulnerable to attack. Moreover, it could actually cause injury by placing too much strain on our connective tissues and to our joints. But to demonstrate the kind of strength we are actually have hidden away, just watch anyone who gets an electric shock and gets thrown across the room. This is caused not by the electricity itself, but by the individual's muscles when they They forcibly contract in response to the shock. This causes them to access 100% of their muscle fiber, which is enough to catapult them across the room, even though they aren't using a jumping technique. And there's one other way we seem to be able to tap into greater muscle contraction: by stimulating the release of the catecholamine. Now that's another neurotransmitter, and the fight or flight hormones. It is hypothesized that under times of intense stress, we can engage much more muscle mass and thereby achieve superhuman strength. And again, this is a spectrum. Actually, causing even a minor fight or flight response is enough to somewhat increase your strength in the gym. See, studies show that if we train with loud noises in the background, or if we train while shouting, which also stimulates the release of similar hormones, we are actually capable of engaging more muscle. So psyching yourself up before a workout just might be one of the very best ways to improve your performance in the gym. Controlling, not suppressing stress might just be the secret to unlocking your full potential. Now, let me say that again. Controlling, not suppressing stress, might just be the secret to unlocking your full potential. Now, I understand that's a powerful statement. Let's talk about it more in the coming lectures. Well, so far we've looked at using meditation and cognitive restructuring to change our mental states. But actually, it might be the case that visualization is even more useful and even more important. Most people believe that we think in thoughts. That is to say, that we have an inner monologue that works like the thought boxes in comic books. Now, more recent research, though, suggests that we can think in lots of modalities. Sometimes we visualize. Sometimes we imagine our bodies doing something and almost feel what we're thinking, and sometimes we just know. This latter example is called unsymbolized thought. And in fact, thinking with our bodies and our senses might just be what enabled us to develop thought in the first place. And of course, science has given this a name. Briefly, embodied cognition is the idea that all thoughts eventually relate back to physical experience. So we're going to talk about embodied cognition. When someone says something to you, or when you think something, your brain interprets this in such a way that gives it meaning. You don't inherently understand language, which means the brain must be translating it into some kind of pure meaning. Psychologists once believed that the brain had a language of its own that they called mentalese. Now, more recently, though, more and more experts adopted the belief that we understand things by visualizing them. When someone says or tells you a story, you understand the story because your brain visualizes it happening to you. When someone tells you they walked through the snow, you visualize the color white. You imagine the cool air on your skin, and you almost hear the sound of the crunching snow underfoot. When we think higher level thoughts, we understand them only because we can relate them back to physical experiences by abstraction. Math, after all, is fundamentally based on counting. This is also consistent with the idea that areas of our brain light up during visualization, just as if we were really engaging in the action. If you imagine swinging a golf club, the neurons relating to that movement will fire in your brain. And as far as your brain and body is concerned, that might as well be happening. So, it just makes a lot of sense to combine visualization with your meditation training and with your restructuring. Don't believe that visualization can trick your brain into thinking something is happening and thereby alter your emotional state. Then just try reliving your most upsetting moments or imagining scenes from a very sad movie. You'll start to feel incredibly sad in no time. Now, one way to use this power of visualization that is well understood is to go to a happy place during meditation. If you can't meditate in a calm, beautiful environment, then at least you can simulate it in your mind's eye by imagining you're on a beautiful beach, in a log cabin in the mountains, or in a large field getting plenty of sun. But you can also use visualization in order to alter your emotional state in other ways. Now, for example, if you're struggling to focus on your work, then you might utilize visualization to create a little eustress to motivate you. To do this, you simply need to remember why you're doing the work and why it's important to you. Now, let's say that you're working towards a presentation for a meeting. Visualize just how great it would feel to conquer that presentation and knock it out of the park. Then visualize what doing that repeatedly can one day lead to. A better career, a better salary, for instance. Now visualize the opposite. Imagine it going wrong. And remember why that matters. You can do the same thing with almost anything you're struggling to focus on by linking what you're doing back to the emotional hook and the reason you're doing it. You can much more effectively then find the determination and the drive you need to complete it. This goes back to procrastination, right? Keep your goals in mind and you'll be much more motivated every day to get out of bed and start working out, or to work on your personal project, or to put in your very best performance at work. One good place to put these tools to work is to increase your confidence and self-esteem. This is one reason we're often told to visualize ourselves obtaining our goals. When you visualize yourself obtaining a goal, you produce neurotransmitters and hormones as though you had achieved the goal. As far as your brain is concerned, that has already happened. This then makes you much more likely to perform well when you actually attempt whatever it is you're going to do. Likewise though, when we unintentionally visualize ourselves falling or stuttering when we're on stage, this actually causes us to produce more fight or flight hormones, which in turn makes us nervous and makes us more likely to actually do those things. So don't just restructure your thoughts. Try to picture things going well. And with the backing of your cognitive restructuring, you should know that this is actually what's more likely to happen. Well, now let's use hypothesis testing so we can become socially fearless. See, in general, removing anxiety and increasing our confidence is a very important tool. And the more you can recognize the power of simply believing in your own ability, the more things will start to go your way. Another tool you can use then is to completely remove social anxiety using hypothesis testing. Now, most of us have some social anxiety, even if we're generally confident. And by removing this, we can become much more successful. So, let's start by asking why confidence matters in the first place. Well, the simple answer is that when you're confident, others think you should also have they should also have confidence in you. This sends the evolutionary signal that you must be higher in the pecking order than them. It makes the opposite sex think that you must be a good catch, and it makes the same sex think that you must be an important and influential figure. But when we stutter and stammer, it suggests that we aren't confident in either the content of what we're saying or our own importance. Either way, this then makes people less likely to believe us, and it makes them think that if we're shy of them, they must be superior to us. The hierarchy has now established us in a much weaker position. It doesn't mean they'll be cruel. It doesn't mean that they're not in a position of power and influence. It just means that they feel that way. So, using hypothesis testing, though, it's possible to go one step further and to completely transform the way that people think of you and the way you interact with others. To do this, you're simply going to remove the anxiety you previously had when speaking to people by testing the outcome of it going wrong. So find a shop that you don't often shop in and then go up to the counter to order something. Remember we talked about this in our last section? When you do it using a funny voice. Say something purposely awkward, or stand in silence for a moment. It will be awkward, and it will be painful, and it will trigger your fight or flight response. But breathe, and try not to get too anxious. What you'll learn is that nothing bad comes of this experiment, and the transaction is completed as normal. Now that was the worst case scenario, and nothing bad happened. Do this a bit more, and over time, the reassociation will also kick in, and you'll learn that there's really nothing to be afraid of. Eventually, things like interviews, dates, and other social scenarios will be far less scary and will trigger much less of a stress response. The result? You'll seem so confident and at ease that your charisma and influence will increase drastically. Now, I want to talk about the law of attraction once again. We went over this a lot in the last section. But even without this step, simply practicing mindfulness and learning to distance yourself from your thoughts will help you to become calmer and more confident. And it will also help you to detach from negative emotions and to thereby increase your self-value. There are even types of meditation that involve meditating on the things you love about yourself. However you achieve it, increasing your self-worth and your confidence can eventually start to make all kinds of things happen in your life. This is called the law of attraction. You remember we talked about this in the last section also. And it simply means that when you believe yourself to be one way, you become that way. So when you think of yourself as a highly successful, high flyer who will no doubt be rich one day, that's how others will perceive you, and that's how you'll act. You'll present yourself as someone more confident. You'll take on jobs with more responsibility, and you'll even dress the part. And when others think of you that way, and you start taking more opportunities for promotions, etc., then you'll start to actually climb the ladder. Now, one specific method of being more mindful is through meditation. The two things combine to allow you to be a happier, more fulfilled, and more balanced person. Okay, so here are some things to know about mindfulness meditation. So, we're going to go through some simple steps to get you on the path for this mindful meditation. That's what this entire course has been about. Think back for a moment all of the sections that you have participated in this course. They have all been building up to this section on mindfulness. See, my hope is you now understand mindfulness is a way to be in the present and only the present. You focus on what you are doing or thinking at this moment without worrying about the future or dwelling on the past. Mindfulness can be used for so many things, from helping you lose weight to regaining your focus on important work projects. It's important for your mental and emotional health, as well as your physical health. One specific method of being more mindful is through meditation. The two things combine to allow you to be a happier, more fulfilled, and more balanced person. So, are some things you need to know about mindful meditation? Yeah, there are some things you need to know, so let's go over them. Okay, the following information is going to give you more insight into what meditating in a mindful state means, and of course, the different ways it can help you. Since mindfulness is a way of being, a way of thinking, and living in the moment, if you are eating a meal, you are focused only on what you are eating, including the textures, the flavors, and the sensations. You aren't watching TV or thinking about your budget meeting. You only focus on your meal. This practice can also be used with meditation. Mindfulness is not easy to pick up right away, especially during a busy day when your negative thoughts and stressful situations creep up in your mind constantly. This is why you should start by practicing meditation. So how do you start? Well, instead of trying to stress yourself out with both mindfulness and meditation at the same time, start slow. Just start with basic meditating. Find yourself a quiet space where you can really focus on the meditation. Now, this can be anywhere from your bedroom at night before bed to even the shower or when you are going for a walk. If you can do it at home where you can sit comfortably with your eyes closed, that can be helpful. But start your meditation by focusing on your breathing and only thinking about your breathing. Focus on taking in each breath and letting it out. Think about your lungs and not about your next meal or all the appointments you have next week. This simple act will help you to retrain your mind to think about just one thing, which is the essence of both meditation and mindfulness. Now that you have this basic introduction to meditation, you can start using mindfulness. Once you get used to sitting quietly and to trying to clear your mind of all those nagging thoughts and only think about your breathing, you can then start with the practice of mindfulness. This is when you are only concerned with the present moment. Once you have the breathing practice down, Choose just one thought to focus on. Only one thing happening in this current moment. This is a good introduction into how mindfulness meditation works. Let's talk about the benefits. You see, before discussing more tips on mindfulness, wouldn't it help to just know why you should start this practice? We're always looking for rewards, right? I think all of you now understand there are many advantages to mindful meditation, from lowering your stress to helping with your mind's focus, memory, and concentration. Mindful meditation can also help your physical health, which is something many people are not fully aware of. Take a look at some of these benefits of mindfulness meditation. First of all, we've talked about this, stress reduction. One of the top reasons people like mindfulness meditation is because it helps reduce their stress. When you start meditating and living in the present with mindfulness, you learn how to think about things differently. It isn't going to be magically gotten rid of, all these stressful situations that in people's lives, but it helps you deal with them better. You develop a healthy coping mechanism where you understand and appreciate things for what they are and stop dwelling on how much worse they could be. It truly is remarkable how helpful this is for your overall stress and anxiety. Now, mindful meditation can improve your memory. See, if you struggle with memory issues, this might be more to do with how much you are trying to keep track of in your mind. Memory issues are often linked to negative thoughts and overthinking. When you start the bad habit of overthinking, it tends to lead to overanalyzing things as well. This is only going to make everything more stressful and frustrating for you, and nothing good is going to come from it. If you can start mindful meditation, you will notice that you are focusing on one thing at a time, so your memory starts to improve as well. You know, this is also going to help you with your concentration. You see, other cognitive functions can also be improved with meditation, including focus and concentration. Once again, you are changing the way you think about things, developing positive attitudes like acceptance, appreciation and gratitude, patience and non-judgment. This in turn allows you to focus on one thing at a time, whatever is happening in the present, instead of trying to think about too many things at a time. With proper mindful meditation, you are learning how to adapt to everything around you, let go of the negative emotions, and appreciate all of the positivity in your life. It is very fulfilling and improves your overall focus in the long run. This can help you with work. It will definitely help you with school and anything else you are trying to achieve. How about lowering your blood pressure? So, as far as physical benefits, the first is lowering your blood pressure. This comes from a lot of the mental and emotional benefits. Therefore, lowering your blood pressure because of less stress, less anxiety, and a lack of focus, all of these can overcome your mind and actually have a negative effect on your body. When you start meditating and using mindfulness in your daily life, you will feel less stressed and overwhelmed, which can then cause your blood pressure to get a good rest. Now, let me give you a word of warning here. You, along with many others, may find that as you try to alter your thinking through mindfulness and meditation, that you are more comfortable where you are. See, we become accustomed to feeling the way we do, even though it may be harmful to us, and very few of us like change in our lives. So, we would rather stay where we are, stressed out, overwhelmed, and filled with anxiety, because that is where we are used to being. Meditate on that and see if that is where you are. If so, you may want to approach this as a new habit or a new goal. Set your plan and include rewards along the way. You can do it. You just may need to move a little slower. Let's talk about weight loss. Don't forget about the benefits of eating and what that does to weight loss. Mindfulness isn't just done in a meditation session, but throughout the day. By living more in the present, you can also focus on what is good for your body, starting with mindful eating. This is when you really think about your food choices and indulge in each meal. Instead of being distracted and just grabbing any snack without thinking twice about it, through mindful eating, you learn to notice the signs of actual hunger and not boredom, or you're not trying to feed your emotions. Over time, you will notice that it changes your eating habits and ultimately leads to weight loss. And the operative word here is over time. Finally, all these benefits can help your future. You can become more successful by being less stressed and more focused on the task at hand. You stop trying to multitask and become a unitasker. I like that word, which really does wonders for you. All of these things you learn through mindfulness, meditation, and they are definitely going to help you in the future. Okay, we've covered a lot of esoteric ground. So now let's dive into how to start doing mindful meditation. First up, where to meditate. As mentioned briefly in the previous section, you need to start by choosing the right place for your meditation. Schedule a time of the day when nobody else is home or when you have few distractions. Wait until the kids are at school or asleep. Your significant other is otherwise engaged, and let the dogs outside for a bit. Every little distraction, from a knock on the door to a cell phone ring or even a buzz, is going to break you out of the meditation. You only need about 15 to 20 minutes to start with. For now, try to choose a place in the house where you can sit quietly and close your eyes. Eventually, meditation can be anywhere you find it relaxing. From driving to work, don't close your eyes, to going for a walk or a hike. See, I prefer a walk. I even put earbuds in to block out distracting noises. I don't listen to music, I just get them in there. However, right now you want to practice with your eyes closed. So choose your bedroom, your living room, or even on your patio if it's quiet and peaceful enough. Sit in whatever location you've chosen with your eyes closed and in a relaxing position. It should be a position where you will not be fidgeting or moving around constantly trying to get comfortable. Keep your back straight and hands relaxed. Once you have gotten into the right position, you can start with your mindfulness meditation. Now, traditional meditation calls for clearing your mind completely. So that's a good first step. Focus on your breathing, and that will help clear your mind of all distractions, all stressful situations, plans and schedules. Get rid of all that. Put your to-do list away and watch your negative feelings and thoughts float away. Once you are only thinking about your breathing, your mind is clear, and you can start the mindfulness portion. This is when you are focusing on just one thing, one thought, one scenario. You are being mindful about the present, so it can be as simple as thinking about the act of meditation, or a scent you smell in the air. What you focus on is not as important as the act of meditation to relax your body and mind. Now, it can also help to focus on a single object with your eyes opened or closed. If you want to close your eyes, get an object that is simple to hold in your hand. This can be anything that is small and easy to feel in your hands. You will close your eyes and hold this object, touching its details and curves, focusing on the sensations, the shape, and the size, and not on any other thoughts that try to creep in. You can also choose a visual object, such as focusing on a painting on the wall, or placing an object right in front of you. Look at the colors, the textures, and design of that object. What you are doing is training your mind to release all other thoughts and focus on one singular thing. Now remember to always be patient. Both mindfulness and meditation will take practice and is not something you're going to pick up right away. Some people do more rapidly than others. Don't stress about it. People need time to get used to clearing their minds and having a singular focus. You have lived all these years trying to multitask. Do everything at once. Think about every little thing that could go wrong, making plans and schedules and to-do lists. It takes time just to relax and be in the moment. So make sure you are patient with yourself. You remember we talked about essential oils in our last section? Well, refer back to those because essential oils can be very helpful, especially for beginners. You are not only going to focus on the scents to help you with mindfulness, but certain scents, as you remember, can actually help you relax even further. You can use any oils you want, but there are some that are good for relaxing and calming the mind. You remember I told you I like coconut oil, which really no one else talks about because it sends me to the tropics. And the tropics, for me, is one of my happy places. Now, others I know use lavender. It's perfect for stress relief, lowering anxiety, and helping your mind and body to fully relax. You will feel calm with a scent that isn't too strong or overbearing. You remember we talked about lemon. It's really good when you are going to do mindful meditation in the morning or when you want to be a little more alert. You see, lemon is a fresh scent that also helps with improving your mood, reducing allergies, and improving your respiratory system. You remember we talked about peppermint. See, peppermint is a bit of a stronger scent, but you can dilute it even more or put a little less into your oil diffuser. You see, peppermint is good for oral health, respiratory support, and better focus and concentration. Now, like lemon, it's also a good mood lifter. Now, a lot of people use rose. I don't particularly care for it, but rose is a light floral scent that will calm and relax your mind while also helping your body to relax. This is good for beginners and can easily be mixed with some other scents. Okay. In conclusion, we've covered an awful lot of ground in this course, but hopefully you now realize that mindfulness is much more than just a powerful form of meditation. Sure, it is that as well, but more than this, mindfulness simply means being more aware of your own thoughts, your own body, and your own beliefs and visualizations. When we do this, it allows us to decide how we want to feel, how we want to act, and what we want to believe, instead of letting the body and mind be reactive to our surroundings. We instead learn to second guess ourselves and to make sure we are in the best possible state of mind and emotional state for the current situation. That might mean being more alert so we can focus on work. It might mean being calmer for our health and for our social interactions. It might mean being more psyched up for the gym. Or it might just mean being a bit kinder to ourselves or changing the way we speak. Mindfulness is the key to unlocking the full potential of your body and mind. And when you can do that, all kinds of doors start to open up for you. Think how that's going to help with forming habits, setting goals, all of those things we talked about. I hope by now you have begun living a mindful life. Please contact me. If you have any questions, any concerns, or even thoughts about this material, be sure and look through and make sure you have all of the downloads. I provided a lot of workbooks for you, a lot of other information to help you on your quest to transform your life. Interestingly, sometimes you can enhance your brain function simply by focusing on the right thing or changing the way you think. And when coupled with what we have learned about plasticity and about short-term memory, you might be surprised to see how it can actually transform your brain and the way you think. Let's explain this further with some simple examples about reframing a situation so that it can help you accomplish greater cognition. Now, the example that comes to mind is the aforementioned hypothetical limit of working memory, which is set at 5 plus to minus 2. Regardless of the new interpretation of working memory, this limit still exists. Likely as we struggle to hold that information in the mind's eye and focus without losing track of it. So, how do you get around this? Well, one novel solution is something called chunking. Now, I know that sounds gross, but it's not like that. Basically, chunking means that you combine multiple numbers into a single number or a single semantic chunk. So for instance, 2 and 3 actually become 23. This way, you are actually remembering fewer numbers. Another interesting example of changing the way you approach a subject is to overcome the cognitive bias known as functional fixedness. Now, functional fixedness describes an inability that many of us have to instantly see all the applications for any resource. For instance, we see a tool as being an item used for a specific job, rather than something that can be used in a variety of ways. An example, if you're given a hammer, you might think of that hammer as something to drive nails into the wall. Or if you're like me, it's something you use to smack your thumbnail. Thus, you might not think to reach for it when trying to pry open a window. Because it is labeled as a hammer, it is harder to think of it outside of that context as a wrench. The result is that you become less resourceful. Again, the solution is to reframe the situation and change the way you ask your brain to operate. Instead of just thinking of tools and resources as tools, try to ask yourself what raw materials you have available to you. So that rather than a hammer, you have a hammer and a piece of wood, some metal, and a stick. Suddenly the options increase. Now taking it further, but changing the way you approach a problem or think about a situation can actually have a much more profound and fundamental impact on the way you think too. Now in particular, it has the ability to change the way that you perceive the world around you and the way that you control your mental state. Now, you remember how I mentioned that when you visualize something, you light up areas in your brain as though you were actually doing that thing. So, when you visualize yourself running, you actually light up areas of your brain corresponding to that movement and to the things you might see and the things you might hear on that run. Well, as it happens, this is realistic enough to effectively fool the brain. In other words, your brain thinks that you are actually running and that you actually are moving. No, I'm sorry, this won't lose weight, seeing as you aren't placing the same energy demands on your body. But in terms of changing your mood and even creating brain plasticity, strengthening the connections, remember, necessary to use correct running form, it really is as good as the real deal. This is why a dancer can actually practice their moves in their mind's eye, and it will be just as effective as if they were doing it in real time, to some extent. When they picture themselves moving, the same neurons fire as though they really were moving. The neurons that fire together still wire together, and as such, you reinforce the movements and can more easily reproduce the routine. Now, of course, you won't be able to develop your balance or grace in the same way because you are only using a simulation of real-world physics rather than actually making those movements. But hopefully you get the point. Anything you want to rehearse, anything you want to get better at, you can do in this way. Now, for instance, if you want to improve your memory retrieval and your ability to navigate a space, well, then you could try simply picturing yourself leaving your door and walking down the road. Visualize the turns you'd make to get to a specific destination and see if you can remember the way or if you can accurately picture the movement. Or you might try closing your eyes right now and then recreating the room you're in your mind's eye, including the positions of items on the flat surfaces. Just how good is your awareness of your surroundings and your ability to commit that to memory? You see, this kind of visualization training can be useful for improving your working memory too, because you're using your working memory to do it. Now, what's truly fascinating is that you can use this in order to control your mental state. Now, I think it's a true statement to say that many of us feel scared in situations that aren't all that stressful because we're visualizing what would happen if the worst case scenario were to happen. You are stressed when you are in debt because you are picturing how it might end in you getting into worse financial trouble. You might be picturing your partner leaving you because you were so reckless with your money. You might be picturing your bank account at zero, or even worse, with a negative balance. But Focus on calmer and on less stressful aspects of the situation. Focus on the plan, and you can place yourself back into a calm state. I'm not talking about becoming a Pollyanna and everything's going to be okay, but just focus on your plan. Likewise, when you are trying to focus yourself on whatever you're doing, and when you're trying to fixate on the task at hand, you need to make sure that you remind yourself in your mind's eye why it's important. You're struggling to complete an essay. Picture yourself relaxing and feeling calm because you're finished. And picture what happens if you don't finish on time. More importantly, focus on the things about that essay that are inherently valuable. Okay, we've looked at many aspects of brain training and how to enhance your brain power. We've discussed nootropics, brain plasticity, brain training, mindfulness and mindful meditation, and more. So, how do you put it all into practice? What are the takeaways here? Or maybe you might be saying, well, therefore what? Well, this is going to vary a fair amount from person to person. After all, we're all different. We all have different priorities when it comes to our mental performance, and we all have different tasks and jobs we need to perform and perform well. But on the whole, here's what you should keep in mind and what you should be using to achieve your ends, whatever those ends may be. Traditional brain training rely on focuses and on improving a specific set of skills. Please remember that. Now, with the possible exception of dual and back training, which is useful for building working memory capacity. You remember why? We're trying to match up two things at the same time. Computer games. Still shocked by that? Learning, exercise, and chess, all far more useful than brain training games. Nootropics that affect neurotransmitters can be useful for a focused burst of concentration, calmness, or creativity, but they are not a viable long-term solution. Neurotransmitters do not work in a vacuum. Okay, proper nutrition is important. However, especially where it can be used to enhance energy on a cellular level and where it supports the production of multiple neurotransmitters. Now, we've discussed certain neurotropic nutrients that are useful for enhancing brain plasticity, leading to accelerated learning. You remember the list. Turmeric, magnesium threonate, lion's mane, lutein. We also talked about things that are good for brain plasticity. Get enough sleep at the right time. You want to be constantly learning new things. The potentiality of virtual reality is really going to help there. Exploring new places. Working memory is a truly transformative skill or ability and can be trained through visualization. And remember, meditation is a powerful tool for enhancing plasticity, working memory, and control over your mental state. Now, my recommendation for most people taking this course is to start by being more aware of the workings of your brain and to look after your nutrition as well as your sleep. Try to incorporate meditation into your routine, especially mindful meditation. Even just 5 minutes a day at the end of a workout is better than nothing. And be sure to keep pursuing new activities and learning new subjects. Consider adding plasticity stack or an energy stack for supplementation. And be more aware of how visualization is driving your mental state. Over time, your brain will grow and you will become smarter and more powerful than ever before. And this is a blatant advertisement, I guess, but a great place to start is to continue to enroll in Udemy courses. Train that brain.